starting. Okay, well, nice to see you all. Well,
Nice to see you.
throw it open for any questions or things you might want to talk about.
Strange dreams.
Strange dreams. Well, yeah, some people have all sorts of strange dreams. Some of them are from God, and some of them are from eating too much pizza. And too...
Yes, the ones from God are the ones that are strange. I think. Can I talk about my dream that I had this morning?
Well, if you want me to interpret it, probably best not, because I'm not going to.
I
Um,
know you wouldn't, but I
uh,
don't know. I know you. I thought about it because you always say that you will not interpret any dreams.
no, because at the end of the day, if it's a dream from God, the best thing to do with a dream is to take it back to God and ask Him for the interpretation. To
That's the
give you,
problem. You see, at the moment, you don't know how to differentiate whether it's you, just a dream, or it's a dream from God.
well, you need to have from that a peace in your spirit. So that's where the intuitive sort of, yeah, I sense this is a dream from God comes. If you don't know, then ask Him. Ask Him if it's a dream from Him. And that's the key in all of it, is building a relationship with God in which you can talk to Him at a level where you be confident of hearing Him talk to you. And that takes some time to develop, and that's okay. But the key, if God is giving you a dream, it would be for two reasons. A, that's the way He communicates with you. B, actually, He can't communicate with you any other way, so He's trying to get your attention through a dream. Once He's got your attention, then He can speak to you when you engage Him about it. And that's the key. I just don't get dreams like that from God, because I talk to Him all the time. So I don't really need to communicate in dreams. But for some people, that's a way that they engage. But if you don't understand it, or you don't find that it makes sense, then really it's not really accomplishing what it's entitled to. So sometimes it is just to get our attention.
Okay.
In the attention, then that's what you take back to God and say, okay, are you trying to get my attention? Are you trying to say something to me? What is it? You know.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Fair enough, I think.
Okay. Okay, Stephen, you got your hand up there.
Hi there, Mike. You good?
Fine.
I was wondering if you could share with me, not necessarily a protocol, but maybe an approach to dividing my soul and my spirit. I'm very conscious in my day-to-day sort of walk. I'm trying to have dialogue with God, but I'm also very aware that my soul still has very much dominion over my actions, decisions, some of my emotions. So I know there's obviously the prayer Hebrews 4, but would you have a different approach towards it?
Yeah, I mean, I did a whole conference on it, and went through the process of being able to allow God to deal with the soul and its wrong emphasis or control or that type of thing. I went through a process of various levels. I mean, I think I went through in the transformation series that I did. That really was my process of going deeper, looking at the surface behaviors. So I looked at the gateways of my life and what was sitting there. How were they flowing or blocked? Then I looked at the thoughts and intentions of my heart, looked at trading motives of my heart, and I did a lot of work around that. But ultimately, that was leading up to the point where, was I going to surrender the soul's right to control, or its thinking it's got a right to control? Because ultimately, the spirit's been around a lot longer. So the spirit is really wants to be integrated and whole. So I went through a process in which God took me to the point of, where was I getting my identity? Because that's the main issue with the soul. The soul, because most of its learning has come from the outside in, is used to getting its identity in relation to the world in which we live. And therefore, usually from other people's relationships, position, lots of things which will give it identity. When we become believers, then our redemptive gift sort of becomes more apparent, and the way we interact with the world in our relationship with God begins to unveil who God has called us to be. And then we start to outwork things being led by the Spirit, and we start to get some more insight into the things God may be speaking to us about on a daily basis. When I got to that point, then God wanted to take me into a lot more, but he was unable to, because my soul was therefore using what he was empowering me to do to validate who I was. And we all have to get to the point where we know who we are, irrespective of what we do. So our identity comes out of relationship with the Father, who calls us sons. We're not sons because we do sonship things. We do sonship things because we're sons. So it's getting the identity from our relationship with God, and where we have been doing things to affirm our identity, that's where we surrender the need to do things to prove the point, either to God or anybody else. And that's the point where, when we surrender the sort of self, the core of who we are, identity based, then we then become free. And that freedom brings reintegration. So what I did, Hebrews 4:12, Jesus being the living, active Word of God, I asked him to come into the space within my spirit and soul and to sever the umbilical cords or soul ties that my soul had to my spirit. And when he severed them, then he reintegrated them and put correct ties from the spirit to the soul. And that is a very long connection. Whereas the ties from my soul to my spirit were very short, and therefore my spirit and soul were tied together and earthbound. Or when I went into the realms of heaven, spirit and soul, they were still tied together there. And so I could only keep going in and out of heaven and stepping in and out of heaven all the time. I couldn't stay there. But once I was untethered from the soul to the spirit, and therefore untethered from this earthbound way of living, then my spirit was able to stay in that realm, and effectively is it connected to my soul by a connection which is like a quantum connection, if you like. It's just I'm instantly connected wherever I am, but there's no limit to the distance my spirit or soul, or the dimensions that my spirit and soul can be in. And that all happened when I got to that point of surrender, and I gave up and put my trust in God and what he says about me, rather than what I can do to prove that or earn it or deserve it. And it comes down to, again, a lot of trying to please God or trying to be obedient to him is still doing it in our own strength, because we're trying. We need to realize that we don't need to be obedient to God. We just need a relationship with God, which will empower us to function out of that relationship. It's an old covenant way of thinking to think I need to obey God, or I'm trying to please God, because that's all about the consequences of not and the reward of, and that's a law-based system. Whereas when we're actually not thinking like that, then we're not going to be trying to please God. We know we are pleasing to God. And that's being pleasing to him. Like the Father opened up heaven and spoke over Jesus, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." That wasn't as a result of Jesus doing anything. It was as a result of him being Son of God. Therefore, the Father's Son. So the same for us. We need to know that we are accepted, loved, approved of, affirmed, without having to do anything to earn it, or without having any consequence for not doing anything. And that's where fear and all those things come in. So yeah, I would encourage you just to engage with Jesus and ask him to separate your soul and spirit. If I was to separate my own soul and spirit, then it would be down to me again, and it would affirm this is what I can do. So I had to surrender to allow him to do it. And that was quite a difficult process, but it's different for everyone. And if anyone's proactive about it, then, you can seek, him to do it by asking him to search our hearts and, to show us where there are these unmet needs, unresolved issues, and unhealed hurts in us, which contribute to us effectively having the soul ruling, protecting itself, coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms. So I did quite a bit of teaching on that in the Engaging God program within the Gateways teaching, and ultimately, we did a whole conference on it to sort of take people through it in a systematic way, because it is a process. It'd be great if it was an event, and sometimes there are events that happen, milestones on that journey, and I can remember when I got reintegrated and I felt whole and different, but there was a lot leading up to that point that brought me to a point of surrender. And it's easy to, well, not easy, but if you're doing something which is not good and not beneficial to you, God, or anyone else, then that's something you don't want to do. But when this is who I am and God made me this way, it's hard to differentiate between what we do and who we are. And that's the key point in the whole process. And sometimes we're not even sure of the motive of why we're doing what we're doing, and all of that sort of gets uncovered in the process. So for me, I'm a redemptive gift prophet teacher. I see the world through a way of finding out how it works. I want to understand how things work, and then I want to explain them to other people. And that's how God made me. But then I had to know what was going on to feel secure in my identity. And then when God said, well, I'm not going to tell you or show you, all of a sudden I'm at this point where now, who am I? If I can't see and I don't know and I can't teach it, then who am I? So it comes down to the point of, if you never fulfill anything that God has called you to do or made you to be, how would you feel about yourself? And that was the issue for me. I would have not felt good about myself if I couldn't do those things. Whereas when you're secure in your identity, you don't have to do anything to feel good. What you do flows out of the security of knowing who you are, really.
I think mine often, I have the redemptive gift of servant.
Yeah.
And because my soul had dominion and it was very short in perspective, I was I had a habit of misplacing my servant. I wanted to mend everybody.
Yeah.
Which is it's a bit of a paradox, because I'm actually a leadership consultant and coach. As a profession, it serves me, but outside of the actual office, as it were, I used to try and mend everybody, especially in intimate relationships.
Yeah.
It got me in so many tricky situations. So this is where I want to be spirit-led, but also not seek you said the perfect word, the event. It's a process, and very much of us fall foul of saying, I'm not walking with God at the moment because I haven't had an encounter. Yeah.
And you'll find anything which is actually genuinely connecting to God will be relational and a process and not an event, because you can't get a relationship out of an event. It's like, you know, when we get married, we have a wedding day, but you don't live in the wedding day every day. You have a marriage, you have a relationship which grows and develops. And, you know, some people continually look for the events because it's easy to have an event. You know, God, come and anoint me, come and do this, or someone lay hands on me, or something which will fix me. And the reality is, God wants a relationship in which we grow in maturity, both within that relationship and within our identity. And that comes relationally. And therefore it takes time. And it's okay to take time. And there's no agenda on how fast that needs to go, because it needs to outwork in the pace that the Father's walking. And you don't want to race ahead of him, and you don't want to drag behind him. You want to walk with him. And that's different for everybody. But if we set the desire of our heart on it, then he will take us through the process, whatever process we need to enable us to get to that point where we become separated and reintegrated, and then free to live the way Jesus lived. Because how he was able to see what the Father was doing every day and know the Father's heart every day, because he was connected to the Father's heart continually, because he was living in that realm and this realm, just like we can do. So we can be connected to the Father's heart and then free only to do that which is unveiled as the Father's heart, that we effectively perceive he's doing. And then we're free to outwork that through who we are, you know, because that's how God made us. So he's given us things to do through who we are. So, you know, for you, that if it's a servant gift, it will come through that. You know, you don't have to try and be a ruler gift to do that, or be any other gift to do that. You can just be you. You know, but you do it in the freedom of, if you weren't doing it, it wouldn't make any difference in how you felt about yourself. And that's where we got to get to. And when suddenly God says, right, all your opportunities for serving, I'm stopping. And it's like, oh, well, who am I then? You know, and the reality is, that's the key. I am who he made me to be, not what I have become because of what I've been doing. You know,
no need to please the Father.
Yeah, well, it's no, because we are pleasing to him already. See, you know, we're already pleasing to him because of who we are, not because of what we do.
That's great.
Okay, all right.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, I've got two questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, go on.
First one's following on from what you're talking to Stephen about integration. I know this is different, I think, from what you mean, but I'm thinking of people who've experienced great trauma, and there's, you know, a separation of souls. How I've heard different things about that, but would you say that integration, like healing of the different parts to bring integration, is that how you would view that as well?
Yes, it's just a different aspect of it. In a sense, how can we know truly who we are if we're fragmented?
Yeah.
Parts of us are stuck at certain ages or dissociative. You know, we couldn't be whole unless we're brought back into wholeness. So there is a sense where dealing with the brokenness, fragmentation is part of the process. You know, it's a healing process as much as a restoring process of bringing us back to who we were always intended to be, and that's whole. So it's very difficult to know your identity if you're fragmented into various identities, or you're stuck at certain ages in which you aren't emotionally mature in that area. Therefore, again, you're not whole. So it is definitely part of the process. And again, as we're walking this process out, you know, I continually ask God to unveil or reveal or highlight anything in which I'm not whole. And that could be an area of woundedness. It could be an area of fragmentation. It could be trauma, which is keeping me locked into the memories of that trauma, therefore not enabling me to be free. You know, there's lots of symptoms that outwork from, you know, fragmentation or brokenness, which as we walk it out, we will find that we can be restored and healed and made whole. And I think that can take place within our relationship with God, not necessarily needing outside help, but sometimes you do, and when you get stuck, that's when, getting someone else to help you can be good. And there are various ministries out there, lie busting and other things, that will perhaps, help you when you get to a point where, you're stuck. And sometimes, the need to be accountable to someone to say, look, I'm going through this, is part of the process and the journey, and that sort of, things. But as we mature, it's easier just to continually be in that process of being transformed and renewed and restored and made whole every day. Because it's when it says, we Psalm 23, we lie down in green pastures beside quiet waters, so that he restores our soul. And when we come to Jesus and come into that intimacy of relationship with Jesus, he says he gives us rest for our souls, rather than being weary and heavy laden, because we're continually working at it, in our own strength. But rest comes from the relationship of trust in him, being loved, joy, peace, all that stuff which outworks through that relationship, brings us into a position of wholeness. But again, it's not going to be a magic makeover weekend sometime. It's going to be an ongoing relational process. That worked as we get to know him more intimately. We open our whole lives up, take off the restrictions perhaps we have, which are coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms. As we trust him and we know he loves us, then we begin to allow him to get below the surface of our external coverings, to get below the surface, to actually bring healing and wholeness to us at the deepest level.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, and that's great. The other question is, I'm doing something, I feel like I'm pioneering something a bit in terms of, I'm a life coach, but up till now I've been coaching mainly Christians, but I'm launching now, and I feel like that this was what God was directing me into, is inner healing for people that aren't Christians. So it's kind of mixture of coaching, inner healing tools, prophetic activation sort of thing, but really with wanting people to encounter God. That's the whole idea of it, really, that they encounter Jesus in the process. So I refer to God as, I'm directly wanting them to engage with God, but it's like a higher power or higher consciousness or whatever. I think my question is, in it all, is how, to what measure can these people really be healed and set free if they're not believers? I mean, the ideal is that they encounter God and be, they're leaving along the way. But how much can I appropriate the cross, if you like, for them if they're not believers?
You can do that as much as you can do it for yourself, because in reality, they're all children of God, and Jesus took everyone to the cross. So everyone died in Christ. Everyone was made alive in Christ. The resurrection applies to everybody. People just don't know it. So the power of the cross is not limited to only people who know it. It's applying to everyone, so they'll get to know it. And you can lead people in encounters that you put that trust into God, who knows what he's doing in a situation in someone's life, to bring thoughts to their mind or bring memory to their thinking. All sorts of different ways God can do it if you just give him the opportunity. Ultimately, he wants those people to know that they're his children, but he can do that if they're open for it. We don't have to sort of preach the gospel in the, you need to accept Jesus before you can.
I think I agree with that, yes.
So in a sense, he will take people through a process of healing them to reveal himself. Because most people who are traumatized find it very difficult to trust people or to trust God. So even to have a higher power, to trust that higher power, is very difficult for people who don't trust anybody, So just to say, hey, trust in this higher power. So they need to encounter God as the light or the source or love. Love is a good one because that's who God is. So, if you sort of look to help people engage in love and let that love begin to restore and heal them and make them whole and reveal truth to them, then, you just trust that God will be at work in it. And it's not your responsibility for the point where that becomes clear and open to who God is. Otherwise we put the focus on them getting to know God rather than God healing them and revealing himself. So it's a revelation that God wants to bring to all of his children, that he's a loving father who loves them and wants them to come into the fullness of their destiny and identity and everything else. So the issues are still the same: identity or lack of, trauma, fragmentation, brokenness. It's just, we've done Libus and various activations of engaging with God, engaging the light, engaging love, engaging peace, depending on what you feel led to do by the Spirit with that person. And then you trust that God will do something with them, engage them in a certain way that will move them on in their journey. And we don't have to get actually knowing everything about it for that to work. It's about us trusting in God that he will meet the person because he knows them much better than we do.
Yes. Yes, great. Thank you. That's very reassuring, because I feel like I'm doing something that is a bit kind of contrary to what perhaps what I've been taught. That this is for believers and it. But I suppose another question is how easy it is for them to maintain that freedom without coming to a.
Well, in a sense, the whole thing that God will be looking to do would be to unveil himself and reveal himself to people, so that they could enter into a relationship in which he will be there like he is there for us. We just have to trust him in the process. Now, if somebody, and this is where you can, as you build a relationship with the people you're ministering to, you can actually point them to the fact that their instability is because they lack a foundation in their life to build on.
Good.
And you then can introduce them to the foundation that you've found, rather than it being just a force or even just a principle. Actually, as a person. And as you grow in that confidence with them, then you can then introduce them to that person, as the one who is going to be there for them, who can anchor them, who can support them in their journey. Because if people have a measure of success and they fall back, and that keeps happening, then you can point out, well, the reason it's happening is because you don't have a solid anchor to keep them in a place of knowing their identity in relationship with their creator, effectively, or the one who formed them in that. So you don't have to rush. I think that's the key. In the past, it'll be, how can we get the 4 spiritual laws out and get them to pray a prayer? And how many of those things were successful in the long run? Not that many.
No, I agree.
So that even those people who did pray a prayer still were up and down and up and down. And how many Christians are up and down all the time because they don't have an anchor in deep relationship? So they're probably still trying to do things themselves with a bit of God's help,
Yes.
And you have to get to the point where, when I was going through my process, I remember God saying to me, look, I don't need your assistance in this process. I just need your surrender. So it was like, okay, I just need to stop trying.
That's really good.
Striving and working at it, and trust in the relationship that he is unveiling. And that journey for everyone will be different, and you just have to just help walk alongside people until they realize that God is there. See, when people encounter God, it produces faith to believing something which is different than what they believed in before. And you can help point out who that is as they're having certain encounters. And God's quite capable of revealing himself. You know, we got loads of testimonies of people who had no real connection with God at all, having had an encounter and they knew it was God.
Right. Great. Yeah. Good. Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm very, very reassuring with it. Yes. I mean, this afternoon I've got 3 people I'm coaching later today, so it's going to be that's great. Thank you.
Okay, where are we? Hang on. There's a few people got hands up there. Stella, you got your hand up. Then there's Inga, and then we'll get to you, Hermina. Yep. You're muted. Hang on.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
You were talking about redemptive gifts.
Yep.
Have you done a teaching on them?
Yep, did a whole set of teachings on them in various places within the Engaging God program, yeah. And there's surveys to take to give you some insight into the way you think redemptively and the way you act redemptively.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. I will try and look for them in the course.
Yeah.
Because I tried to listen to Arthur Burke. It's difficult.
Okay. Well, I've simplified it, and I think it's in the module 1, preparing for destiny, I think. So there's, I think, several teachings on there and the material really to get you to do the surveys to get an insight into who that is. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and locate them. Thank you.
Okay. Inga?
Yeah, I have a problem understanding this about separating the soul from the spirit. So I'm just trying to understand it. I'm trying to picture it to see, because that to me would mean that, does that mean that there is evil in the spirit? I mean, or is
I went into this in depth earlier on, actually. So
yeah. I probably didn't get it. You talked about
Well, what I'm saying is the soul connects to the spirit with soul ties for independence for the soul using the life of the spirit. You're only separating it so that it can be integrated. You're not separating it to keep it separated. The separation is to cut the umbilical cord that the soul puts to the spirit, and then the spirit can put a new connection to flow from the inside out. So the soul is connecting to the spirit from the outside in to maintain independence. So there's nothing evil in the spirit. There's nothing evil in the soul. It's just the sense where the soul is operating independently, and therefore it draws that, because it didn't have a relationship with the spirit for most of our life. You know, whenever we realized that our spirit was alive to God and therefore alive to our soul, the soul has lived independently for most of our lives. So it's used to maintaining its own security, identity, protection, direction. So then when the spirit comes along and starts giving it direction from the inside out from God, there is resistance. So it talks about the flesh wrestling against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh. So it's really just the principle of who's in charge, you know. And when Jesus severs the wrong soul ties, he establishes the correct ties from spirit to soul. So everything flows from the inside out correctly. So that's simply what it is. Yeah. Well, just think of you having an umbilical cord that goes from your soul to your spirit.
Yeah.
And getting it severed, and then having a new one put in that goes from the flow goes from your spirit to your soul. Then everything flows from the relationship with God within our spirit, and our soul and spirit become integrated and whole.
You mean getting our needs met from the spirit, from the inside instead of the outside?
Yeah.
From our spirit instead of the soul, so that the flow comes in the other direction. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So essentially everything that the soul needs comes from our relationship with God, who is within our spirit and flows out of our spirit gates to connect with our soul. So it's the soul allows that to happen, or desires that to happen, when it stops operating and looking from the outside to get all its needs met. And all the hurts and pains and stuff that the soul has had damage and trauma as a result of trying to get its own needs met can be restored and made whole from the flow of life that comes from the inside us, rather than from whatever we're trying to get from the outside.
Mm.
So.
Oh, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you had your hand up earlier. Yeah, go on. No?
Mimi, yes.
Yeah.
I had a question.
Yeah.
I've been, for most of my life, I have been a Christian, but I didn't expect or think that God was going to do miracles now, today. But then I discovered Bill Johnson and Bethel and those things. And I saw these things, and I went to church and showed people, but they didn't believe me. But one of my daughters went to study there. Well, the thing is that most people, well, not the most, but a lot of people in my church are ill right now, very, very, very ill. They have cancer, they have horrible illnesses. They don't believe me. And my daughter, the one who is studying in Bethel, is also ill. It's not very serious, but she is ill. So they said to me, look, even your daughter, who is in the States, in Bethel, with Bill Johnson and so on, she's ill and nothing happens. The thing is that I am really worried because a lot of people are ill, not just my daughter. That's not very serious. But the thing is, why? Why are so many people ill in my church, and what can we say to the world about life, about Jesus came to heal us if we are, well, not me, but most people in my church are ill.
Yep.
And what can I do about it? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's not a very good advertisement to a healing God. But I would suggest that most people don't fully understand the nature of God as our healer, and they're in unbelief. And that's usually because of the system that they've been brought up in, whether it's a system that doesn't teach miracles today, or, it can be a theological position that, well, God doesn't really do that stuff today. There's lots of different explanations why people don't accept the healing that's on there in God. A lot of people don't know the power of the cross and don't know what Jesus did on the cross, so they're limited in their understanding, and so doubt, unbelief are all part of the process that people are in, and therefore it's not easy for them to receive healing or miracles. Now, all you can do is just keep ministering to them, keep praying for them. And, if you've got a relationship with some people, then you can look to help them in the process of understanding healing and health and what God's desire is. But most of the religious institution, which we call church, really doesn't operate in that dimension of power, authority, and everything else. And even the Bethel sort of heaven invading earth type of model is still limited in that it's not really encouraging us to live in a realm of heaven, and therefore live in an atmosphere of complete health and wholeness, and that will begin to change and transform us. It's still looking for God to come and do something, when actually God wants to equip us to live in health. Now, the Bible talks about laying hands on the sick and see them recover. The Bible talks about healing gifts and gifts that the Spirit has, which are healing gifts. And so all of those things can grow and mature. But for most churches, they don't believe it. So it is very difficult when you don't believe the truth to experience the truth, because knowing the truth sets you free. And if you don't know the truth by experience, then you can't be set free. So a lot of people remain sick because they don't know the truth. And they know Jesus healed in the Bible, they just don't believe it's going to be for today. Now, even a lot of believers struggle with sickness in lots of different areas. Again, some of it, I think, is a lack of identity, a lack of knowing that health is our identity, that health is our inheritance as believers, and allowing the symptoms of the disease or the sickness or anything else to create doubt and unbelief that stops us receiving what God has for us. But it's a complicated issue in that there are so many different factors relating to sickness. There's genetic factors, there's environmental factors, there's trauma factors, there's just the fact that we live in a fallen world and there's all sorts of sickness around. There's so many factors which we need to overturn to actually live in health. I mean, it took me 3 or 4 years of focusing on God as my healer and health. This is 20 odd years ago, to come into a point of living in health. But I've lived in health, the last 20 years or more. So, I have a testimony of being able to live in health and living in the relationship, which I know that my dad is my healer and he wants me to live in health. And any doubt will hinder that whole process. So what can you do? Well, you can, legislate for revelation. You can start decreeing revelation will come, and individuals that you may have relationship with, you can encourage them to believe that God is their healer and that health is their inheritance, and keep laying hands on them and keep praying for them and blessing them, and seeing what Jesus would have you do. It's like, don't do anything other than what he's showing you to do in the way he shows you to do it. It's not your fault, and you're not under an obligation to do anything other than what he is showing you to do, on a daily basis. So don't feel condemned by that, or, and let's face it, the reality is, if your daughter is at Bethel and she's still not actually yet found the resolution to whatever her problem is, that shows you that it's quite a difficult thing, because they do see a lot of people healed and a lot of people have ministered to, but it's not a instant fix. It still should be a relational process that God wants us to know him as our healer, rather than, I can be healed, or because it can become it become non-relational when we're seeing the miracle or whatever out of context of God who is doing it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's sorry, but that's easy to say. Well, but here in Spain, I mean, in the States, it seems to. I really believe it, that there are a lot of miracles. My daughter, the one who is healed, has seen people healed. Mm. But here in Spain, as far as I know, nobody has seen it. So it's easy to say that. But if you have never seen it, I don't know if where you are in Britain, there are a lot of people who are healed. If that's common in your church or ecclesia, people can see it. People can say, this is my experience. I know it. But here, the truth is that nobody, as far as I know, maybe somebody has, but nobody has seen it firsthand, not on the internet.
I understand that. And essentially, you're living in a atmosphere of unbelief and doubt, which is not a positive place. Because Jesus said he couldn't heal many people where there was doubt and unbelief, and I think he quoted that from Nazareth, his own place, that he couldn't heal many people there because they doubted who he was. So it's not easy. I mean, Bill Johnson's son, I think, has got deafness, and yet has healed people, seen people healed of deafness, and he's not yet been healed. So sometimes, there aren't simple answers to why and what these things are, but you have to create the belief yourself. You have to focus on the truth, engaging God, asking him about it, so that you can come to that place where you actually believe it, and not just believe it as in, well, I believe it in theory, but actually really do believe it. Then you can change your atmosphere, and then you may be able to spread that atmosphere somewhere. It's got to start somewhere, and I would ask God, what does he want you to do? Does he want you to focus on legislating for the change in the atmosphere? I mean, there's millions of things you could do, but you need to know what he's asking you to do. Then you're not going to get guilty or condemned, or if nothing happens. It's not your responsibility, to heal people. It's your responsibility to only do what you see the Father doing. And he's the one who heals. And if doubt and unbelief limit people's ability to receive from him, then helping people to identify what God is really like is the first steps. So sharing with people that God is love, that God loves them, that he's their Father, that he has good things for them, he doesn't want bad things to happen to them. All of those things are the foundations which will eventually help people to come into a revelation of the truth of who God is. And you start with those simple things with people. Encourage people, to know who God really is, and yes, you can use the Bible to do that, but you can also share, engage with people, help people to experience the love of God, because it's God's love which is the demonstration of his desire, which will be outworked in healing, because he loves us. Now you could say, well, why didn't he just heal everybody? Well, you could say, why didn't he do anything? He does it through us. And there are certain environments like the one you're living in that may be less or harder for that to take place. So someone's got to start somewhere. And therefore, an individual can be a place where something spreads. So I would encourage you to just focus on you getting to know God better, to get more intimate with God, to really know his love for you. And then you can then share that as a testimony to others, and then that testimony will spread. And then that may well create an atmosphere around you which is more conducive to people being and experiencing God and healing and wholeness. But I know it's not easy, because the general religious institution doesn't really operate out of a lot other than unbelief and doubt, and it takes a lot for people's belief systems to change. But God's at work looking to reveal himself to people, so he's going to sort of try and help facilitate that. Okay. Who's not gone yet? Hang on, there's a few people got their hands up there. I think Sarah had her hand up first. Go for that one. Can't hear you. No. All right, okay. All right, well, while she's trying to sort out her sound, I think Mary, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to ask if you have specifically done teaching on 7 pillars of wisdom. I know you mentioned it in some of the teachings and the conference that we done, but the specific of the 7 pillars of wisdom. Have you any teaching on it?
I did include the 7 wisdom pillars with the teaching I did on wisdom's heights and what's there. And I also did it within the teaching about getting mandates. Now, those 7 pillars of wisdom are you have to engage them. So
Okay.
it's better to engage them and discover for
What's
yourself
this?
rather than just go whatever. I mean, I did went through the 7 pillars as a process of engaging with a mandate or a blueprint or a court case, and seeing those that were within each pillar help you to progress in the development of that blueprint or mandate or scroll. So that was part of it. But the best thing to do is to go to Wisdom's Heights and engage Wisdom and ask her to show you the 7 pillars and how they're for you to relate to. Because although my experience of it, and I first got that experience from a friend who testified to going there, which caused me to want to go there.
Please tell me again.
So from that perspective, that is a process again, which is better worked out individually yourself, because it may relate slightly differently to you.
Okay.
And, you know, it's definitely something for development. It's a discipleship process more than anything else. We go there with something in embryonic form, and then with Wisdom's help and those who are in, and the 7 spirits of God are involved, and there are different 3s of the 7 spirits of God in each one of the pillars that we can connect to. And I went into that basic teaching. Going there, engaging it, is the best way for seeing it develop.
Okay. I thought probably they have a specific heading or something like that, because this is what I was like, you know, because there are some things that I saw and I was like, man, did not taught it this way, like health,
it's
family,
each one has a function.
You know,
Rather than a title, they have a function.
Function.
And therefore the thing that goes on in there you can engage with, and that function can be unveiled. The best thing to do again is to ask Wisdom to unveil what each pillar is for you.
Okay.
And then you'll have a personal encounter with it, and whatever you need from it, you'll either, Wisdom will say, well, actually this isn't the place to do that, or actually, yeah, this is the place, and you can do that within those 7 pillars. And again, they may have multiple levels and depths. That's the thing with the realms of heaven. There's often a surface level of where we engage something and we have an experience of something, and then you can go deeper to another level, and maybe another level and another level.
Okay.
Just like with the firestones and different things in heaven, there are different levels of engagement with them.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. You got your sound back.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Good. Okay. So my question is about Adam and his earth suit or body, and I'm not quite sure if I can figure that out correctly, because there's this Hebrew and Greek mindset still fighting in my head and my mind. And then I got the idea that physical suit is lowered, and Jesus revealed himself to us by lowering his energy to light and to himself as Jesus, the Messiah, the person, you know. And so if I understood it correctly, you said that initially, intentionally, or in the beginning, I don't know, Adam didn't have a body, he was only spirit. And
no,
I didn't quite get that.
No, I didn't say that. I think all of us start out as a spirit. So we have our spirit is pre-existent before we come into this realm. But in coming into this realm, we now come into a physical body. Adam had a physical body, but was clothed with his spirit on the outside. So he related to the world through the spirit first, before the natural senses. So everything was interpreted spiritually, and therefore in relationship and connection to God. So when he decided to follow his own path, that spiritual connection to God and the world internalized and was in him, and therefore his body therefore needed clothing, which is what Jesus did, or the Father did, in giving our body skins to actually be able to interact with the physical world without being able to, without losing all the stuff. Because essentially Adam's spirit, it's difficult because we can only look at what we know now and what we see now. So Adam's didn't have a blood system in his original form, because light was the energy within his physical body. So his spirit energized his body. So he didn't need blood, and he didn't need the same things as we have now. But in a sense, it's a bit of a moot point because we are physical now. So we need to get back to what is God want us to be doing now. So therefore, he wants us to be restored to the fact where our spirit can clothe our body. And that's why we can expand our spirit around our soul and body to create an atmosphere around us to interact with the world through the spirit first. You know, when I first started to engage my spirit and my soul and then began to look at the world, I was only seeing it through the memory of what my soul knew. But when my spirit started to engage it, I was starting to interpret information through my spirit rather than just my soul. And therefore I began to perceive the world around me differently, because my spirit actually gave me the information rather than my natural eyes linked to my memory. Actually, my spirit started to filter the world. So I began to perceive it in a different way. Now, eventually, when my spirit became separated and untethered, and therefore I could extend it beyond, then I began to look at creating a spiritual environment around me hosted by my spirit, you know, and ultimately that's sort of where we are now. Jesus came, and you're right, he took on our form. And he identified fully with us. So he took on the limitations, but he had the spirit without measure. So he didn't have the limitations of the soul to impact on the spirit. So he was able to interpret the world through those senses which were activated by his spirit. So he could read people's thoughts. He knew the reasonings of their heart. He could see into someone's past. You know, there were things that he could do spiritually that were connected to the fact that he was operating in the spirit and not in the flesh, in the way that his soul was not dominant, but he was whole. Now we're having to become whole. And that's a process, obviously, of coming into being more spiritually discerning, and we have to practice that. That's what Hebrews 5:14 says. We train our senses through practice to discern. And therefore our spirit and soul can work together in a way that brings discernment. So again, we can be clothed with our spirit, but it's not that we will be exactly what Adam was, because Adam would have still matured in sonship. So I don't want to go back to what Adam was. I want to go back. I want to go to what Adam would have been had he not chosen to walk his own path, which would have been, you know, the ascension into sonship and maturity of sonship, because he was sinless to begin with, but he wasn't mature, which is why he made the decisions he did. So there's a process of maturity that all of us goes through to align with that spiritual maturity that we need. And that may well take us into abilities and reinstigating abilities that they did have. The ability to use light and sound, the ability to travel spiritually. I mean, there's lots of things that they could do that have been lost over human history, and particularly at certain events like the fall and the flood and Tower of Babel and other significant things where certain abilities were what's the word, sort of, well, removed, but more so just inactivated. And God wants to reactivate the fullness of our power of our mind, because that's really the power. It's our thinking, our consciousness, how we choose and create reality from the framework of our spirit in relationship with God rather than the framework of our soul. So every one of us creates our own reality every day, but we keep getting what we've always got because the reality is framed out of our memory in our soul rather than framed out of the possibilities that exist within our spirit and what we can see in the spirit from the heart of God. Once you're connected to the heart of God, your mind, your consciousness can begin to choose realities which are not what you've got before, because there are possibilities that exist that go beyond our memory. Now that takes a renewal of the mind process, so that we can begin to frame lives from the purpose of God for us and our relationship with God rather than just out of memory. So when you really have an expanded consciousness, some of the things which are the way we live right now will change, and we will change to be able to be more creative, and we can call things into being like God did, and we will be able to do the things that Jesus did and greater things. That's the promise. But we're going to have to learn to do them the way he did them, which was in intimacy with the Father and seeing and knowing the Father's heart, and then choosing creative realities to frame life around him, which is what he was doing all the time. And most people haven't learned to frame their life out of their spirit. They frame their life out of the past and memory, and therefore they keep getting the same repetition of failure. Where that can change when we start to see realities that exist as possibilities. You have to collapse a possibility to make it a reality. And that's what they call popping a quiff from a quantum science physics perspective. It's seeing a reality and choosing it. Now you have to see it, and most people can't see beyond their own experience. We have to see from the mind of Christ, which is an expanded reality of possibility that exists for us to choose. Hence, you can choose to do things which are not possible physically, like transrelocate or travel in the spirit or change time or contract or expand time in ways. All those things become possible when they are possible to you. When they're not possible to you, you can't do them. So our mind has to be expanded to greater possibilities than what we just have through our upbringing, whether that be trauma or nurture or nature. We have a spiritual reality which goes beyond that. Until it becomes that possibilities and potentials are things we can learn to choose, then we'll just continue to go on the same way. But it's a renewing of the mind that enables us to do that. Okay. I need to go in order. I think Stephen was the next one who had his hand up, I think.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
It's a really interesting theme. It's gone from sort of wisdom, then through to sonship, and through the expanded consciousness and having a Christ-like mindset. My situation is I've got a newly launched business, but I've also got an investment that's going to provide great financial provision. And a part of it terrifies me because of my framework of operating from my soul. It's broken. My mother used to tell me, as a belief set, we were always robbing Peter to pay Paul. Okay, so that's a symbolism of lack, strain, struggle, and somebody steered me to basically read the book of Proverbs, but also engage with wisdom. Because if these provisions are going to come into play, then I need to act as a son, but also in stewardship. And that's actually dealing with the Father's business. So I'm just wondering, have you got anything to add in the sense of wisdom, lady wisdom? How do I walk with wisdom in the sense of being this son and being this steward of these provisions, because if I operate from my soul, I'll probably be poor again very quickly.
Again, some of it is, well, what mandate do you have? And it's operating, make sure you stay within the mandate that you've been given. And within that mandate, know the Father's heart. Because it's the Father's heart which will motivate you, which will direct you, which will keep you within the boundaries of his heart until you don't step outside of it. And therefore, don't make decisions based on anything other than the Father's heart and the peace that comes from that. Therefore, you're not going to, don't make rash decisions, don't make decisions that does not give you time to reflect. Be more meditative and reflective of the decisions you need to make, so that the influence of the Father's heart and wisdom will be involved in that process, because she's there to help us to rule out of the Father's heart in righteousness and justice and out of love. It's taking time. You know, whenever you come to a decision or an opportunity, don't rush into it, but take the time to reflect, to gain the Father's heart, because not all doors that are open to you, you should walk through. We need to know which doors to walk through, and, you know, don't go pushing doors. Just let God open them, and then you can walk through them. Just because one's unlocked doesn't mean that you should open it. So that, again, it comes back to walking in intimacy, walking in relationship, growing in the relationship, and then you more intuitively know the Father's heart and respond out of it. And if it isn't based in love, then you know you can steer away from it, you know, because it's with the heart of the Father is always going to be based in love. And then, you know, if there's resource, then you seek the Father for whatever you do with it. You know, it's like I would say in anything financially, you know, ask the Father what to do, when to do it, and do it, you know, and that is not under obligation. You know, giving and using financially wisely to bless must be done out of the Father's heart. And you could bless people financially and it could ruin their lives.
Yeah.
Because they can't handle what you give them, and therefore it stops them relying on God and then their own process.
Wow,
so
yeah.
It's always being wise, not necessarily to get people out of financial trouble, but to help them to wisely grow through it so they learn to handle finances well. You know, so many stories of people winning the lottery and winning this, that, and the other. Years ago, it used to be the pools, and having all this money, and then basically they lose it all because they don't have any wisdom and they operate selfishly. And so in financial matters, you know, it comes to me, what is God asking us to do? And then all we need to do is do that, because God loves us to give not under compulsion, but cheerfully. And the only way you can give cheerfully is knowing what you're doing is giving out of the Father's heart and not out of a need you might see or out of compassion even. Because sometimes our compassion can come against what God is doing in someone's life. Because we try to fix people and get them out of things. And I know you were saying earlier, fixing things is a big problem. So when you have resources at your disposal, you've got to make sure you don't try and fix somebody, that God is in process of using situations to help them and to mature them. Because you can try and fix the situation and it will stop them maturing. So it's really important that you seek God and have real peace about what you're going to do when it comes to financial issues.
Yeah, fantastic.
So,
it's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I've got time for one more, then I've got another meeting. Inga, you've got your hand up there. That's the last one there. Nope. Inga? Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, voice was out. You mentioned something about choosing a reality in order to create it. And you mentioned like time and other really big things. But I was thinking, and I tried this myself, and this is to simplify it too much if I say, if I choose how to feel today or how to live today. I mean, for example, when I feel weak, I make a choice. I'm not choosing this reality of my weakness today. I'm choosing the reality that I'm strong, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. You can choose the reality which you know aligns with the heart of God and God's will and purpose for your life. That is growing in sonship as a creative son, like Jesus chose to do creative things in creative ways, aligned with the Father's heart, and therefore he didn't allow anything to contradict that in his life. And even when it came to allowing himself to be put on a cross, he chose that. If he'd chosen not to, they wouldn't have been able to do it. He could have easily disappeared. He could have easily gone into another dimension. He had the ability to do all those things and showed some of that, but he chose to actually follow the Father's heart. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was anguish, that was our anguish he was taking on. That was the our pain that he was taking. It was he is going to take the whole of humanity on the cross. It was a sense where the weight of that, it was our sense that he was becoming fully representative of man there. He was never gonna let this cut pass from me, was never an issue of him. He had already decided and set his face towards Jerusalem, but he was identifying with us, and the weight of that fully came on him. So it was quite a challenge. But yeah, you can choose anything which aligns with what you know to be the heart of God for your life on a daily basis, which is the joy of the Lord being your strength, and rejoicing always in and all of those things, living in love, joy, and peace. Essentially, everything flows out of rest. And if we're not at rest, then it's very difficult for any of these things to manifest. Rest is the place where we're trusting in his abilities and provision, and his fathering us into sonship, which then releases us to come from that place of rest, because we're not coming out of fear or striving or anything else. And we can try and choose a reality which is out of fear. That's never going to manifest. If it's motivated by the wrong motives. That's why relationship with the Father is so important. This whole process. I do not want to choose realities which are good ideas or even my own ideas. I want to choose a reality which is aligned to his heart. And then that enables me to choose multiple ways of doing it and outworking his heart, but it's still his heart. And therefore, does God want you to be weak? No. So his heart is for you to be strong. Therefore, you can wait upon him and renew your strength by choosing the reality where you have all the strength you need to do everything you're called to do. And that's the key. I frame my life according to that principle. Whatever I need to do today to fulfill my destiny, I have. That's my way of viewing life, and that's the reality in which I live. Everything I need, whether it be time, energy, strength, anything, wisdom, insight, truth, anything I need to enable me to fulfill my destiny today, I have available. And I choose to live from that availability. So if I need 26 hours today, I can have 26 hours today. To everyone else, it will appear like 24. But for me, it will be more. Because I may need to. Right now, I've probably got, 25, 30 different things I'm working on. In terms of teaching sessions, I've got some conferences coming up in the US. I've got a conference down in Cornwall to do Courts of Heaven and stuff. So I've got loads and loads of things that are all potentially, you know, I'm still doing the Engaging God program. Now, I don't have the time in my diary to be able to do all that. But I do have the time in my diary to do it because I choose to. Therefore, if I've got an hour, that can be 8 hours for me, you know, because I choose and align my reality with what God is calling me to do. And therefore, I can always have what I need in any situation, you know, because that's the reality I choose to live by. And therefore, I frame my life around that reality. So I'm never going to run out of strength. You know, I was in Ireland recently and I was doing a weekend conference there. And I did, I don't know, 12, 14 sessions or something like that. And plus all sorts of other things alongside it. And they were like, aren't you tired? And it's just like, well, why would I be tired? You know, tiredness is a mindset which comes out of you don't have enough strength to do what you're called to do. So, you know, I was going for 14, 15 hours a day for 3 days, and I wasn't the slightest bit tired, physically, emotionally, spiritually, at all, because my expectation is I live with all that I need, you know, and, you know, that's things. Now, if I was to, I don't know, not go to bed until 3 o'clock in the morning and then get up at 5:30 every day, I would get tired physically because I don't have a mandate to do that. I'm also sensible to live in a healthy way, and the body needs physical rest. Therefore, you need to actually live in a spiritual way, but also it's got to be outworked practically. You know, if I was to eat 10 tons of sugar every day, you know, no doubt I would feel lethargic because that isn't living in a healthy way. You know, so yeah, you have to balance it up. So it isn't just, well, I can make spiritual decisions which can override stupidity in my living every day. I have to live in a sensible way as well. So I measure all of that, but I have all that I need, and that's the framing and choosing the reality. So yes, you can choose to have the strength and see that work in every way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I need to leave it there.